The director of the school is a French frog, Jean-Michel Glachant, and I'm welcoming 3 experts. I will show them in a minute. Of course, we have one banker from a development bank, Michel Hallack. We have one fan of digital disruption at ENTSO-E, the Association for Power Transportation in Europe, and a regulator, the Italian regulator. Now, how will it work? I will ask them 3 questions. Questions very simple. First one, where are the innovations to come in the electricity sector? Will it come from the infrastructures, from generation, from the markets, or direct peer-to-peer, or even outside the industry, off grid, behind the meter? It will be the first discussion. Second one, why is the existing regulation challenged by innovation? Third question, how to rebuild the regulatory frame to have a regulation good enough for the wave of innovation? Each of these 3 questions will last 15 minutes, and then I will have 15 minutes to take questions from the audience. For example, Luciano, Renata, Maria, Marius, Anna, Mathilde, Milkias, etc., being already listening to us. Is anything clear for everyone? We will start, as Michel is a little bit late, we will start with Laurent, and then we'll go to Massimo, and then to Michel. Michel is a banker from Washington, D.C. She works in a development bank, the Inter-American Development Bank. Everybody understands? We start. First question, where are these innovations? Are they coming from the infrastructures, the generation side, the markets, or even direct peer-to-peer, or totally outside, off-grid, or behind the meter? Laurent.
Yes, so good morning and good afternoon, Jean-Michel. Thank you for inviting us today to contribute. So in a nutshell, I would say the innovation comes from everywhere, infrastructure, markets, and I'm not sure generation is the right term. I would rather say distributed energy resource, being prosumers, distributed photovoltaics, distributed generation, and some new generation like potentially gas and introducing more clean gas into the system. But I will, in my introduction, more speak around the infrastructure and markets. On the infrastructure side, I would say there is already an ongoing set of innovation now described at high level into the clean energy package, giving a certain level of direction. And I want to highlight that there are some elements of that vision which are already stretching the way we're going to use the infrastructure in the future, particularly on topic related to how are we going to allocate the scarce grid capacity in the future to all these new assets available, and we want to use that system. And as well as innovation on the market sides, where we really see a trends of bringing a market closer to real time, better reflecting and aligning with physics, and where basically we see the all potential benefits of digital technologies in enabling new ways of interaction between market players and the infrastructure through the real-time process. So I definitely do believe that we do have a lot of innovation to be done, both on the infrastructure piece, how to optimize its usage, how to plan it in an optimum manner, but as well as into the operations, markets, and particularly in view of all the technology which gets developed at the edge of our system, at the grid edge. And we are talking here about the prosumers, basically a new type of data available from the prosumers and generators, which will overall bring, I hope, in the future, much more visibility and observability of the system as a whole. So I'm truly a believer of innovation at each corner of the value chain and not only into one single area of our value chain.
I see, Laurent. You are seeing innovation everywhere, from the individual parts, the individual players, but also the markets themselves and infrastructures. And the big thing is to combine them in a way which can work. That's what you are suggesting. And in this, you think that the markets and infrastructures have a key role to play. I do catch it. And you, Massimo, you are a regulator. How do you see it? Where are the main innovations to come, and why?
Yeah, thank you, Jean-Michel, for inviting me to this debate. First of all, I think I quite agree with Laurent with the fact that the innovation is impacting on more or less on all the stream, but I think there are some parts where mainly innovation is impacting reducing costs of technology. So that's the main impact I see also in the recent past, because if you think at the main innovation we could see in the recent past, which really changed the energy structure, which is the shale gas technology coming to be competitive with the other technologies, is kind of like the cost going down of technologies. And this is the good part and the bad part at the same time, because if we look at the future, we have a lot of technologies we are looking at, particularly in the generation side, distributed resources, which is storage, which is renewables, and you have a pattern of cost of those technology, which makes it very difficult to see what will happen in the famous 2030, because it's just reductions in cost happening with the pattern which is not completely clear. So there will be a lot of innovation coming, because that will shape the energy sector in a way, the pattern in the cost of technology. I mean, especially storage and the choice about storage, but also about technologies. I mean, power to gas is another example, which is quite powerful as a technology, but today it's not so cost effective. Looking at the market, I see where I see the impact of innovation darkly in the regulation we are managing in this last years and in the future is on the retail market mainly, because I think technology will really enable the customer to actively participate to the market in a way, but also to manage all the processes in an efficient way. I mean even the basic processes of the retail market functioning. I mean switching. I mean changing the owner of the one point of withdrawal. I mean all the basic processes, and I think technologies and communications will really enable the possibility of making all these processes very cost effective, efficient, and be very low cost. And I think that opening the market to retail, really the smallest customers, is really a question of reducing what I call transaction costs, which is all the costs related to changing customer, changing supplier, and everything. And so that's where I see the impact of technology. And then Laurent already just mentioned it. In managing the network, all these distributed resources, which will pose new challenges, because now we have a big challenge in front of us, which is we have the distribution network and the transmission network, and traditionally the management of the two networks was in a way decoupled. You had the TSO managing the transmission network with all the resources being there, and the distributors mainly developing the network. There was no real management apart from some voltage control on the distribution network. Now that the world is really changing, because the TSO will have to manage the system with resources which are on the DSO side. So there will be a need for coordination, which I think only really innovation and technologies in communication and data management and everything will be able to face in the right way. If you think at what is happening on the XBID project at the European level, I think also there is a big challenge in the TSOs making available the capacity to the market. That's the first example of cooperation. In that case, is among TSOs, but I see the issue of cooperation between TSO and DSO, which is where I expect innovation could really help us out.
I will try to summarize, and I will give you 1 minute to do the summary. Are these innovations reducing the costs of traditional service? Are these innovations changing the architecture? It will be more decentralized, less centralized. Are these innovations bringing mainly new services, things we weren't able to do before? Or are these innovations reducing the cost of buying, selling, discussing, agreeing, what you call transaction costs? What are the main effects of the innovation? 1 minute each, because Michel is still not there. Laurent, 1 minute.
So obviously, I think there will be benefits in the various areas which you mentioned. That's for sure. What we, I think, see is really a change in the architecture of the entire power system, and this power system becoming a system of systems and integrating all these systems together and getting the proper coordination between TSO and DSO is absolutely essential here. And I think the one of the key innovation is definitely onto that system architecture. I think when we are looking at the power system, we need to be aware of the challenge which is ahead of us. We are talking about trying to find a way to get 100% of renewable in the electrical system in 2050, and getting 100% of renewable in 2050 will largely shift the traditional resource which are today used, and which will basically bring new service, new ways of managing inertia. So there is really, I see currently in the polls, the infrastructure being a bit behind the market here, but there is really a lot as well into rethinking how to operate, how to optimize these.
So you are seeing different effects of innovations. Huh? We do not have only one. According to you, and to you, Massimo, do we have these various effects of the various innovations?
Yeah,
or do you see a mainstream?
Maybe I see a mainstream in the not in the reduction of cost of the technology we are using today, but in the reduction of the cost of the technology we will be using tomorrow. So I see the main impact of innovation is still in cost, but on the cost of the technology of the future, which is maybe some of them we are already using, and then we have pattern of costs which are still going down. I think the main driver should be, at least, I'm not sure it will be, but it should be looking at which will be the really cost-effective technology of the future, and that's where the innovation will impact. And with this, I also include all the technology you need for a real active demand-side response, which is, from my point of view, part of the answer of how you will manage the system, because demand-side response means, from my point of view, a lot of new automation in the demand side, because I don't see really the final customer understanding the patterns of prices and then the switching on and off appliances. I see only really the technology coming there and making a bigger automation process through which the demand will become active without even the customer maybe realize what's happening, because you are just exploiting, I don't know, thermal storage. You are just exploiting the flexibility of the demand side without impacting, at least not impacting in an evident way to the service for the customer. So that's one important part, which means which has within it a lot of technology, because it's not only the appliances, but it's also the communication technologies and the way you manage all the system.
Very welcome, Michel. Michel Hallack from Inter-American Development Bank is joining. Of course, she's in the morning. Good morning, Michel. Michel, it's too late to have the first discussion with you, which was, what are the innovations coming? Both people being there said they are coming from any part of the electricity system and even from out the electricity system, and they have many effects like cost reduction, change of architecture, new services, lower transaction costs. Now we are entering the second phase. The tone of the voice of Massimo and Laurent, the tone was very positive. So if the tone is positive, why is regulation challenge? Why is regulation question? Do we have anything to look at with the existing regulatory frame? Michel, do you want to start or do you prefer to be the third? Yeah, but Michel, you should open your microphone. Ta-ta-ta.
Now you hear me.
It's better, eh? Please go.
Good. So, good morning. I think one of the key elements here is the characteristic of the industry. When I was a student, not too many years ago, I would like to. We studied that energy comes in a certain way, and all the regulation and that way we think the industry was thought about this. So you generate it, and your consumers were dumb, and all the idea was, okay, regulation the monopoly, after how we go to the consumers and etc. But now things are changing. So the industry is changing, and changing in many ways, because cost reduction, as you discussed, many different ways. But so why regulation should change? I think regulation should change in two big ways. One, the first thing is consumers. Behind the matter is something that usually regulation and regulatory theory didn't deal with. You suppose that consumers were not big part of the industry. The incentives were not really related with final consumers, especially households. And that was that's something that's a big chunk that is being become really important in the industry, that was not inside of the regulation and the regulatory concerns. The second thing that I think that's still more challenging for regulation, that the big change of innovation is not that something is changing, but something is keeping changing. So the big thing is not that we have just one change that you can, okay, as we have when we have a big change in the gas-fired power plants entering the system, so you decrease scale, you increase competition, so you have a big change in regulation. But now, maybe when you put electricity with digitalization in all this technology that's moving, so it's not one big change, it's that, okay, you are changing, but this is the tendency, we will be changing continually. And usually when you think about regulation is something that brings previsibility. So need to be credible, and the players need to see where the industry is going. And now with innovation, know where the industry is going is really complicated. So there you have a big challenge for regulation, because regulation need to be able to adapt, but also need to be able to bring some previsibility for the industry. Also need to help industry avoid stranded cost and this kind of things. So one of examples of this that comes to my mind is the tendency that we have, at least in Latin America, to do long-term contracts. The a power purchase agreement for long term. So how we solve renewable? So everybody say, okay, do long term contracts. However, with the decrease of cost, this kind of solution can be quite tricky. So I think that's the big change of mindset that regulators should have. That's not just changing for the new innovation that's come, but deal with innovation in a continuous way.
Okay, so Massimo, not only you have to face a revolution, but it's a permanent revolution. So first, you agree? And second, how will you undertake a permanent revolution while giving some regulatory certainty to consumers and investors?
Yeah, you're right. It's a big challenge. No, I agree that it's not a single change, but as we were discussing before, since the main driver of change is the reduction in cost, and reduction in cost is not so easy to see where it goes in the future. I think that that the changes will be going on for a lot of time. So I think the main challenges I see for the regulation now is that what we see now is that the process of adopting new regulation is very long. So there are a lot of complexity in adopting regulation. That means that and there is another point which is very important, because if the adopting new regulation takes very long, but you are able to make a regulation which is very flexible, then maybe you could manage the everything. But I also see in parallel a tendency also at the European level to define the regulation at a very with a lot of details. So trying to include in the regulation a lot of details, and this risks to become, obsolete even before entering into force. So that's the main challenge I see. So we will need to try to change this approach maybe, and to try to be as flexible as we can, just to adapt to what we are not able to foresee in the right way. Either like that, or maybe an alternative is that in a way we start, because what I mean is that if the regulation continuously change, there is a lot of risks for the market. So we cannot expect the market to invest in a market, to invest a lot of money in a market which is changing due to technology and changing due to regulation in a way. So either we try to find a solution for that, but we need to give certainties to the market, otherwise we risk to not having the investment at the end of the day. And the other point I see, which is more, kind of going into the specific topics, is that we still need a lot of harmonization at the European level. Just two examples. The first one is in the structure of the market. For example, in the day-ahead market, we still have a different structure of the market around Europe. But even more than that, I still don't perceive that we have a real harmonization in tackling the support to renewables in the future, because there is no trying in this process of splitting the obligations at the national level. There is still maybe not so much the harmonization, just to take into account the real specificities of the single countries, and I need that I think that due to the complexity of the future, we will still need to harmonize more the approach to how we see the future, even in the concrete politics that we are going implementing in the future.
So Michel, as a banker, is looking at where to put the money of the bank. Massimo understands the issue, but sees also that in Europe we have a policy frame put into the law which is constraining the path. And you, Laurent, you are regulated, so in your opinion, what does not fit, what does not work well in the existing regulatory frame?
Okay, so I think we can improve on various fronts. So the first front which I observed today is that there were a lot of demonstration projects of new technologies made, which led to a certain maturity of technology. In Europe, we call them Horizon 2020 mostly, and and several similar initiatives in countries. And I'm still surprised with the amount of innovation staying in boxes and not being put and implemented in the real world, precisely because the gap which exists between the existing regulation and what the technology is able to do. So there is an obvious situation here which we need to fix. I think we could fix it in a different way. I would say we could go on a way which could be allow some form of regulatory sandpit, if I may say, in some area of Europe where we would not start by being a perfect regulation, but recognizing some free space, more on a principle as what Massimo says, and then looking on data and facts, and out of facts and data, trying to basically reshape some element of this design. But I want also to say that that's one way. There is also an interesting situation in Europe, is that with this clean energy package, we now have a framework in place. That's very interesting. And this framework still has a lot of detail to be written when it comes to what we call in Europe the methodologies and the way we do certain things, certain calculations, certain and I think what we need to be striving for, both on the regulation and the TSO side and DSOs, is being innovative into these methodologies and not looking too much backward and taking best advantage of digital technology. What is the data we have? And I was surprised by some exchange with some colleagues from the digital sectors who were saying to me that the trends in the digital sector is to regulate more on principles and then let the data flow, and then basically dig down to the detail of the data and basically regulate out of facts and data rather than detail methodologies and so on. So isn't there a new way of regulating out of digital and data? That's maybe one interesting question for the future.
I will summarize my way what Laurent did open. Laurent did say, okay, I'm happy to play in a sandbox. It remembers me when I was a kid, but maybe adults at a certain point go out of the sandbox to play real thing in real life. So what is a part of the reshaping that we should start now, and not to be put in a sandbox every morning? That's a bit funny because this morning I did see my deputy for research, Leonardo Meus, issuing a paper finding that sandboxes are really very effective, very good. We have to push them. But the suspense will not be long because we are jumping into the third part of this discussion. The third part, what will be then a new appropriate regulatory frame for a wave of innovations, a wave which is due to last several decades now. Michel, do you want to start or not? Yes?
Sure.
Please do.
So I start with sandbox. That's a discussion we had already also. I think when you think about regulators in this new era, you need to have at least 4 or 5 steps, depending on the way you look at that. The first thing, it needs to increase the capacity and the capability of regulators to learn. For me, it's the first thing, especially when you look at world around, not just look in Europe. That's something really important because usually regulators are the last one to know that something's happening, and that's really complicated because it may lock many technologies away. So I think that's an era of smart regulators in somehow. You have everything smart, regulators need to be smart as well. The second thing that I think that's quite important on this is the ex-ante evaluation. So every new thing needs to have a regulatory impact assessment in somehow. So this is something that's quite it's not new that people has come in talking about this has long time. However, nowadays that's much more important because as regulation is difficult to change and doing mistakes in regulation now can be much more costly than before. Before, if you have a tariff that is a little bit, have some cross subsidies, it may impact in a small group and then it may impact inside of the industry, but it does not impact across the industry. It did not impact the choice of technology in the industry. Now, even some small subsidies or some small misleading in the regulation may have a really big impact because it can impact in the choice of the technology that we're implementing. So this is quite important. So the regulatory impact assessment ex ante, it's quite important in somehow. After that, I think that it's really important to test it. As you test technology, you should test regulation. Why? Because as Massimo said, it's really difficult to change regulations and can be really costly. So you should try it. It's why a sandbox, pilot, and something like that's quite important. And have a really timeline. So are you testing this area for this time? And it helps also to give previsibility for the adaptation, so people can actually be able to see where the things go. After, you need to have ex post evaluation. After that moment, so you need to evaluate what happened. And the big thing here is to know what criterion you are using to evaluate it. Because if you change the criterion, the evaluation can be quite different. So there it's quite interesting, the idea that I know that you have been working in the FSR in the innovation area, that there is different kind of policy. Innovation policy, environmental policy, energy policy. So we need to know what are the variables, what are the objectives that we evaluate each regulation. After that, you need to learn and need to be able to have a process that allows this capability to adapt it. So regulation needs to have some kind of step by step that helps the thing to adapt in some kind of previsibility in the adaptation. I think that's something that needs to be built, and that's challenging, but I think there is not another way to go. So.
Mm-hmm. I know well what Michel is saying because I spend my Sunday reading a note she's writing with colleagues at our bank and with people at Florence School. I do not know if the note will be public one day, we'll see. But we will see what Massimo thinks about it. Michel is roughly saying that there is a whole frame of change for regulatory offices. What do you think, Massimo?
Yeah, no, I agree in principle with what Michel was saying. I think that the fact that the regulator should know a bit more on how also innovation and technology is coming ahead, and also adapting the way of adopting regulation to all the needs to receive. What I've seen in the recent past, that it's becoming more and more important having stakeholders around the table when you are trying to define your regulation, because you cannot be smart enough to understand what happens in the market, what happens in the infrastructure, in the industry in general, because it's happening very fast. So you can try to learn, but it's only the interaction with stakeholders that guarantee you that what you are doing is in a way, sound and feasible with respect to the word you are going to implement it. I also had some, if you start from some simple maybe approaches that coming to some concrete possibility of improving regulation, where I see some space is first of all in removing. There are still barriers to the real single European energy market. If I think, for example, it's kind of one of my topic I always bring up, and sorry for that, but if you look at the way the entry-exit tariffs impacts on the power market, then gas tariff, then you just understand that we are still not exactly there with the really competitive market, because that's a lot of and in Italy we also have a component of the efficiency which goes to the on the gas side to the generators. So it's even there are some distortions there that we can think of deal with in the future. And on the other side, there is still a lot of debate on this capacity market, yes or no. That's another very important point of the market design, which we should maybe find a solution which is common, because that brings a lot of uncertainty on the future on some kinds of investments, in a way that you risk to have very different market models around Europe, and that's where you could have problems. I just mentioned before a common approach on the support scheme for renewables. I also think that there is, I don't know, it's really difficult to understand how to make the support to renewables, that given that you think of renewables still need some support to develop with the trend you need to get to the target at 2030, and how that's compatible with, for example, PPAs, because PPAs means the market provides for investments, and on the other side, renewable support schemes, even with auctions, which is a market way of supporting the scheme, means that the system is supporting renewables. So the more the system supports renewable, the less PPA will be economical in the system. So I think that without clarity on the trend and on the solution you will be taking, it will be very difficult for real changes to happen, because private investments will be waiting for what happens for the decision from the government, and if the decision for the government will happen, you will have maybe some lock-in technology effect on the technology you are choosing. So I don't know, maybe a mix of all that is something that we should bring, but there is still no balance from my perspective on the various interventions you mean. And for example, also in the CO2 mechanism, I think that the CO2 mechanism we have in Europe brings a lot of risks on the investments, because there is a high price volatility, and I don't know if the real mechanism we are putting into place will be able to really smooth the volatility in the CO2 mechanism. And the CO2 mechanism is something which will bring risks on the infrastructure. So those are maybe the main points that come to my mind, looking at some specific and practical issues that the regulation, in a broader sense of the term, I mean not only the regulation by the regulator, but also regulating the whole sector, even including the intervention from the government and from the state.
Thank you, Massimo. And you, Laurent, the regulated, how do you see it? You have to take regulation as it is to do something. So what could be a regulation helping you going through the wave of innovation?
Yeah, so I think that's a fundamental question. I must say I'm not a big believer of a big bang in our energy sector. I think the story shows that we evolve step by step, and I'm rather a believer of I would say injecting innovation into our network codes, amendments into our future clean energy package, while we progress and we write a bit more the principle and detail, is we regulators and TSOs and DSO, let's be innovative in the way we implement some of these amendments. Let's recognize all the effort which is now put together as part of the consultation which we do around these fundamental tools to make sure that we really invent market designs or infrastructure operation which are truly using innovation at the edge of our systems. I think that's very fundamental. The other element which I would like to advocate for is receive a bit of freedom of movement, if I may say, from regulator to TSOs and DSOs, in the sense that, first of all, some regulation does imply arbitration between CapEx and OpEx. And of course, if you've got a regulation which is purely on CapEx, then you tend to naturally kill any savings innovation brings on the OpEx. So I think it's evolving, but there are still some areas where it's required to change. But beyond that, I think this also goes with how are you going to classify the level of risk which you're going to accept your TSO and grid operators to take. And if you are really going into strategic technologies enabling to go beyond N-1 or having significant impact on security of supply of the power system, what are you going to allow your grid operator to take as a risk into trying this technology and recognize some of these will be lower level of availability of the system, because we cannot deny that innovation does have an inherent technological risk as opposed to a transformer or device which is in the industry for 60 years. So there is really two areas. One is to be smart in doing the future regulation, and the other one is opening a bit of space between regulators and grid operators to allow the risk to be taken and to allow the business model to fly as per these new technologies.
1 minute for Michel and Massimo to close the loop with Laurent.
I'm going back to what Laurent just said. I think that it's quite important to actually have some space. The big question is what the size of the space and how to deal with the regulation of something that have market power and the new things that actually you have market power in the future as information. I think that's the big issue, how to deal with these two things. Historically, you are not really good on that because it's really hard when you cannot, it's why you, the coupling thing, you do the unbundling because you're really hard. The unbundling story comes because basically you are not really able to, when it's bundled, it's difficult to separate how to regulate something that have competition or risk and profit and something that there is not. So in the past, we did the easy solution. Okay, let's unbundle this. Now maybe you should think another way, and actually that's, I think, one of the biggest challenge. And I think we will not have an answer, one for all, that fits for all. And that's why I keep repeating it. The idea to have adaptation and have the learning and testing things is really key, because if you have this solution, even the unbundle in the past would not be necessary. And I think you have the same questions we had, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years ago, you have again. So I think that's...
Massimo, step by step, what are the steps?
I think if I understood correctly what Laurent was saying, I think the regulation, at least if I look at regulation in Italy, which is the one I know best, I think we are, since some years, we are trying to evolve towards what we call an output-based regulation or a TOTEX-based regulation, which is, in a way, the approach is just saying, I don't just pay for investments and for operational costs, just with an incentives to efficiency, but I also leave some room to the TSOs to decide which is the best way of dealing with one issue. So I look at the output and then I let the decision, because innovation can really change what the TSO needs to do, and I cannot even know what the TSO will have to do to change that. And what came to my mind is some experiments we had in Italy about the dynamic thermal rating of the lines, which is something that can avoid building maybe new lines with just an operational measure, and this is not what the TSO today tends to do, because they are really more incentivized to build a new line than to optimize the use of the line they have, and this is just one very simple example. There was one last point that came to my mind when Michel was mentioning market power, which is one of the challenges I think we will have in the future, because my impression, at least if I look at again at the Italian system, which is the one I know well, I see that market power on the market, on the electricity market, will not be improved by the new stream of renewables coming into place. What we are seeing is that there is a lot of local market power, because the network is not kind of a copper plate, and that's something we still today we just don't know very well how to deal with it, because if you have market power on the balancing market, for example, either you regulate. There were some in the past. For example, in Sicily, there have been 3 years in which all the power plants there were regulated, fully regulated. I mean, they were paid the full fixed cost, and they were obliged to bid the variable cost. And that's how we deal with the fact that we really didn't know even how the real situation was, but we understood that there was a big market power there. So I think that also some better understanding, that's the first part, but then how we respond with the market model to avoid that at the end of the day, a big part of the power plants will be at the end will need to be regulated because there is still no real competition there. So that's something I see coming, and I don't see any real common approach to this problem, and I see that will be a problem.
Thank you. Now we are giving power to the people, power to the audience. We are taking questions from the audience. So please, audience, ask us questions. I see that we have 73 participants, so we should have questions. The first one from Stefano. Let's take something concrete to discuss. Virtual power plants. So what is the appropriate regulatory frame to implement virtual power plants? Who wants to say something? Candidates? Laurent.
So we have a new electricity balancing guideline, which is redefining how we balance generation and consumption into the pan-European system. So for me, it's a typical example where there is a new network code which come into place, which is trying to open up towards these new technologies. And of course, if there is further amendments to be required, but I think there is an ongoing development in that space in Europe.
I'm going to the next question. Next question, funny a bit. But okay, there is innovation, but there is innovation in markets. It's not a scoop. So why should we discuss it more? Why is it an issue? Candidate? Michel? Please go.
Why is it an issue? Because basically, when you have long-term investment, everybody wants to be somehow, Laurent, you say it to you, that you cannot give a really big investment that you are not really expect to recover it. And different of other industry, the recovery of it depends a lot of the regulation. So here you have a really big problem of trade-offs and of how we deal with this new disruption. And that's something that I was just doing some graphs yesterday that's quite fun. Because actually, if you look how the forecast of most of the big forecasting agencies, EEA, AEA, name it, and first they are always wrong in the same of energy mix in the renewables. If you look at the last 10 years, usually they are 20% wrong. And after you look, what are the hypotheses that they did when in the cost curve, and the cost curve of they use, it's always linear. And or it really is, there is a slope, but always linear. The big thing when you have a disruption, we don't know many things, but you know just one thing. The cost curve is not linear. They are kind of logarithm. If you look out the disruption, what happens is that the cost curve completely change, and they have kind of a logarithm view. And what does it mean actually? This is mean that actually you are not able to forecast exactly what's going on. And even if you are not sure, you have a forecasting problem. So it's not EEA, it's almost all firms don't know exactly what's going on because they don't know what the cost curve will be. So regulators and firms are really dealing with this kind of challenge, and that's a big challenge. That's why we're discussing this in this challenging way, let's say.
So, Jean-Michel, if I can just maybe add very simply, I think that why we should deal with this innovation if the market is just providing it. I think for the same reason why we are putting their renewable targets for 2030. I think that the need in EU to put their targets and for 2030 means that in a way everybody is thinking that those targets won't be there just for free. So that we will need to do something to get there. Otherwise, we just leave it to the market, and the market will make the investments and everything. So that means that if you make some reasoning on what will be the optimal structure of the power plants in the 2030 without any support, without building storage for free, giving storage to the market for free, or without, you still don't get to those targets today if you just look at the market functioning. So in a way we are just trying to understand how to accompany the market to those targets in the point where we believe that without accompanying in some way, whichever mean you would give to the term, the market won't just go there. Otherwise, we wouldn't even need the targets. That's a bit the background. So what will you do? Will you support? Will you believe in PPAs, and then you will just build the storage? The TSOs will build the storage for free in the market. So changing the cost and the price perception of the renewables and everything. So that's the question that we are not really answering now. At least not in my country.
Another question from Rondé is very basic but very funny. André is saying, what is the primary issue? What is the first thing we have to take into account? Technology or the cost of getting secured electricity or regulation itself? Basic question, but
the idea is that you cannot decouple the things, because you need security of supply. Obviously, is something you cannot avoid. You cannot do without, because the final customers will always understand a bit more of renewable or a bit less, but will never understand being in blackout. So that's something. Then the question is. How you will go there in an efficient way. So from my point of view, the question is always how do you will get to the renewable targets without throwing away a lot of money, as for example we did in the past, where we build a lot of in 3 or 4 years ago, we built a lot of photovoltaic, where the technology was still at a very high cost with respect to today. So we get there with a very inefficient pattern. So the question is how we guarantee security of supply in an efficient way using technology? So it's all connected, and regulation should support if needed.
Thank you. Nicolo, quite funny question also. Come on, Michel. How could a regulatory authority having only 50 people and sometimes less do all these things you are asking, ex ante this, ex post that, etc.? Come on.
As I said, I really cannot answer exactly this, but I don't know.
Okay.
I need to check actually what's the regulatory agency staff and objectives, but what exists on the other hand are many new tools to deal with it. So all the data that Laurent was saying, all the new models, all the different algorithms. I think I am not able to know the number. I'm not able to know what are the staff need to do. So we need to do it specific, and sometimes we do analysis of the capabilities and the objectives of that the regulators need to do. But what I know is that most of the regulators does not use the most updated tools to deal with it, which could improve a lot what they are doing. So.
Massimo, Laurent, a short comment on this. Is there a staff constraints in a wave of innovation?
Yes, for sure. It's but I think going back into that direction, I think machine learning will be the buzzword for the future, and I'm sure part of our activities on TSOs and regulators will be managed by machines, just scrutinizing data from markets and system operation and basic trigger out and identifying bad behaviors or wrong. So I think this element of constraint of resource can also be somewhere compensated by the technology itself. The reality is that in the way we get regulated, I think we are still behind in terms of being fact-based regulated, and I think that has to that has to evolve. And I think the constraint is not on regulator only, but on TSOs as well, is bring more accurate facts so that we can basically demonstrate and explain what happens in our systems.
Yeah. Yeah, coming back to
Thank
the
you.
beginning, maybe in a nutshell, that's why we need to be smart at the end, because we have at the end constraint in the people.
Thank you. Another question for Michel, very specific. Michel, do you know that the European Investment Bank is now opening a review of its energy and climate financing policy and even running a public consultation? And the question is, does your bank do the same? I know that the president you have at your bank is very moving and doing many things, and I did read this morning that President Macron, the French president, did take the president of the Inter-American Development Bank as an advisor for France for climate policy. But tell us, Michel, what does happen into your bank?
I think that's a big issue here, but there is no open public consultation on that. We are looking what will be the result of the public consultation and financing, but we don't have the public consultation.
Okay. Next question. The three of you, we have a new electricity directive coming, and it gives to the regulator a role to assess and monitor progress towards smarter grids. How will it be used? How could regulator use this coming from the law to do positive things? Any idea, Massimo, Laurent?
Well, on our side, we do have an existing innovation team in ENTSO-E, which try to gather best idea from all TSOs into various innovation hubs on topics like HVDC or market designs or digital and so on. So I would say it's not like a fundamentally new approach. We try to gather our best ideas already. I think moving one step further into basically setting up these indicators is an interesting one. The only caveat being that the person who set the indicator should be knowledgeable on the detail of the technology to assess these indicators. So that's a new skill to be developed, I think, maybe in regulators on the deep technology understanding. And the other element I would be cautious about is that the vendors of technology should not assess these, because then they would have a vetted interest into forcing certain technology into the system. And I think we should be careful on the notion of technology neutrality. If I take example of virtual power plant storage and so on, as grid operator, we don't care. We want flexibility, the cheapest way of flexibility, and we don't want to favor one flexibility over the other ones. I think that's an indicator which is going to be challenging to put in place from that perspective, but it's going to be interesting.
Another very detailed question. We have a European guideline on electricity balancing. It helps introducing a European-wide balancing platform. Then the question, on this platform, will be people able to trade only energy or also capacity? It's a question about innovation in practice, but very detailed. Any people having something to say or nobody?
I don't know, maybe I can.
If nobody,
no, I can
matter.
Just say a
Massimo?
couple of words. I think that providing platforms to exchange resources on balancing means that you are exchanging maybe energy, but at the right point in time. So it's also having the capacity when needed. I don't know if the question was about exchanging capacity in terms of reserve. Maybe that there will also be the platform, to exchange that. But I think that in principle that should be the point. My worries are the one I was mentioning before, the fact that we are having really problems in exchanging on the balancing market at a very local level with very clear local market power. So from one side I say yes, fine, we should have market mechanism to exchange the resources, but from the other side we should also be able to deal with local issues where exchanging resources at the EU level doesn't solve the problem.
That's the end of it. I do deeply thank the speakers. I've been thrilled to have somebody from Washington, and it shows to our audience that we can discuss across continents. And I hope the report of Michel will be available one day. And of course, I do thank also the audience, more than 70 people. And if you like it, Florence School can organize many other online debates, because it's a quick, very interesting and cheap way for the audience to keep track, to keep following the many novelties and the many changes we are entering in.